So, for those who don't know, every Thursday night, Stephen and Taya release a new episode of the Police Accountability Report. And, frankly, anyone who is interested remotely in questions of criminal justice, law enforcement, and the ways that the U.S. police system affects us all, you should absolutely be checking out PAR every week. And you should also, I should note, you should check out Stephen and Taya's new incredible documentary, which is called The Friendliest Town, which you can now rent on Apple TV and Prime Video. So please join us in supporting and celebrating the awesome work that Stephen and Taya do. And we're going to go to them now to get a spot report on, what we can expect from the criminal justice world in the coming years. So Stephen, Taya, take it away.
Hey, Max, thank you so much.
Hi, Max. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that's going to be really interesting, of course, is, people know already that the Biden administration has somewhat of a friendly relationship with policing. While he wasn't endorsed by the major police unions, he has a past history of being sort of a pro-police person, which, of course, has raised tremendous concerns with activists. And, as we well know, and as people who like us who live in democratic cities like Baltimore, policing is firmly ensconced in the political process and pretty much runs things in this town. So Democrats are not necessarily, open to reform. Now, he has pledged reform. And, one of the things that we're going to be looking for very, very closely and watching is whether or not, Biden sort of reinstitutes the Department of Justice investigations into policing, which pretty much were put on hold by the Trump administration. And we're very critical to reform here in Baltimore, what little reform we had, because in 2016, the Justice Department, after the death of Freddie Gray in police custody, came to the city and did a pretty fulsome investigation and found a lot of corruption and unconstitutional policing. And, Taya, you want to talk a little bit about the...
Sure. Well, what I'd like to mention is that critics on the left do have a valid reason to be concerned that the Biden-Harris administration won't be tough on police reform like they hope. Part of the reason is the 1994 crime bill. It's called the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. And this was enacted during a time where Democrats were doing their best to look tough on crime. And now this bill does have some good parts to it. It has the Violence Against Women Act in it to protect people who have been victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. It also has a 10-year ban on assault weapons, but it's also been criticized for expanding mass incarceration in the United States and escalating the drug war. And one of the things that was boasted about was putting out the money to put 100,000 new police officers on the streets. So even though the majority of people who are held in prison are being held on a state level, there was a great deal of federal encouragement and funds to expand incarceration, and we're still seeing the effect of that today. So critics on the left do have good reason to be concerned that the Biden-Harris administration might not be as progressive as they hope.
Well, one of the things, we talk about a lot on the show on the Police Accountability Report is really putting policing in the proper context. And I think that will be important as we watch this new administration take over, because as we witnessed in the Capitol, and I think that really shows and great evidence of what policing really is about, is it's not about, in this country, law enforcement. It's about politics. And I think that's why when you saw the people sort of overrunning the Capitol, had this sort of feeling that the police were going to be on their side, even though they were obviously breaking the law and aware of the fact they're breaking the law, but they felt empowered because they felt that police was on their side, meaning in a sense that policing is purely political, right? It's not a part of law enforcement. And that's what's so interesting, the dynamics, what we'll have to see with the Democratic administration. Are they willing to really call out policing and say, you know what, you have strayed far from anything that is productive in these communities? Look what happened. Now, I mean, a lot of people say, police weren't prepared, but there's a lot of evidence that some of the police were actually working with these protesters. And certainly if you listen and watch the videos, you can see that protesters saying, hey, we're on your side. We're Blue Lives Matter. We're all that. And that makes policing a really politically fraught situation for a Democratic administration, because we have seen in our own city, Democrats support horrible policing. Some of the worst police corruption cases in the history of this country occurred in Democratic cities. And clearly, as you're seeing on the screen right now, those protesters thought with all, and I can't really blame them, that police were somehow on their side, even when they're breaking the law, which is a really interesting thing. So will the Democrats be able to somehow reverse this idea that policing is purely an expression of politics or an expression of political power, or what we like to call hegemonic policing, where police don't really work in the spirit of public safety, but rather projecting power of whoever controls them. And I think that's going to be a really critical point, because in the past, Biden has showed that he is not really, sort of in that. But there is a police advisory board, right?
Right. So within the first 100 days, Biden has promised to put in place a national police oversight committee. Now, he's promised to put that in play in the first 100 days. However, we don't have a lot of details yet on what that's going to look like. And once again, there are critics in the Progressive Party who are concerned that Kamala Harris, as was shown in her role as the top cop in California, may not be aggressive enough in pursuing and prosecuting police officers who are guilty of misconduct, brutality, and extrajudicial killings. For good reason, people are concerned that with Kamala Harris's, Vice President Harris's record, that she might not be the one who will be aggressive enough in helping create the police reform that so many want to see.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm always skeptical as a reporter of any sort of commission. That politicians say. It's sort of like, okay, here we have a commission, now we're going to do this. But we have seen as a city that has experienced horrible brutality, we have seen commissions, task force, all sorts of other political amalgamations of people, and nothing has resulted in it. As a matter of fact, ACLU of Maryland just released a report showing that thousands of police brutality complaints were ignored by the city of Baltimore over a period of time. And so I think that the concern is that are Democrats really going to once and for all sort of take the stance that political policing has to stop, and that policing has to be reoriented towards some sense of law enforcement? Of course, we all know that the law is corrupted, by the political process. But I think that's a critical juncture that Democrats are facing, and I personally, I had not seen it on a local level or a national level, and I do think that the Department of Justice investigations were useful, because once and for all they said, hey, Baltimore City Police practice unconstitutional and racist policing. But, since that, during that time, the same time that the Department of Justice was here, we had the horrible gun trace task force scandal.
Absolutely. That's something I wanted to add to, Stephen, that you made such a good point. While the Department of Justice was investigating Baltimore for unconstitutional and racist policing practices, we had one of the biggest police corruption scandals since the 1990s, the Rampart scandal in LA, and that was the gun trace task force. This is 9 police officers who were arrested and convicted for robbing residents, dealing drugs, and stealing overtime, money out of the taxpayers' pockets. And this was happening while the Department of Justice had its eye on Baltimore City. Yeah. So when we have a little skepticism, and I would say it's a healthy skepticism of these different organizations that are going to, committees and PACs that are going to give us oversight. We've had plenty of oversight. What we need is action, change, reform.
Pure philosophical change, which the Democrats have not seem to be willing to do, at least on the local level, where you literally philosophically, hold law enforcement accountable to be involved in, fair law enforcement, not in projecting the power or projecting or, racking up stats or racking up incarceration or feeding the system that feeds them. And I think that's going to be really difficult. And I think Biden's got quite a challenge, not just because of the reasons that Jessel talked about, where he's got a divided Senate, but the Democrats are just as embedded with police as the Republicans. And, that's been shown throughout history. So really, Biden's going to have to make a serious break. And also, with the vice president, what Taya talked about, there isn't not a good history there.
During her tenure as California's top cop, there were many police reform advocates who were begging her to please investigate. For example, there were a series of police shootings in San Francisco. They were begging her to investigate police misconduct in California, and they got very little response. Right, and it wasn't until the end of her tenure in about 2016 that she actually launched an investigation going out the door into the police-involved shootings in San Francisco.
And, this would be a good time for Democrats to, really, take marijuana off the Schedule 1, yes. For example, a way of, de-accelerating mass incarceration, things like that. There are other things like that they have an opportunity now, as Jessel was pointing out, a very small window, but things that they could do. So will they have the guts to do it? Will they have the guts to go in there and say, you know what? marijuana being Schedule 1, which means it's the most dangerous.
Considered
and also,
a heavy narcotic that's dangerous beyond prepared.
But also, as we've seen in city after city and town after town, one of the great ways, or not great ways, one of those effective ways to entangle people in our mass incarceration system, will the Democrats have the wherewithal to challenge, that sort of conventional wisdom and challenge the structure of mass incarceration and over-policing that we report on all the time?
I think Stephen has it right there. Will the Democrats have the guts to make the changes in the face of Democrats being accused of being soft on crime, which we know they're not? Will they have the guts to really take a stand and give people the police reform that they've been asking for?